Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Zafrir Asaf. We'll try to be briefer with the curriculum. Mr. Zafrir Asaf boasts a comprehensive background in international development and the impact economy, with a primary focus on business opportunities in emerging markets. Zafrir holds the position of chairman at the Society for International Development, Seed Israel, and serves on the board of the Israeli Forum for Impact Economy, IFIE. Previously, Zafrir was a partner at Blue Laurel Advisor, a strategic advisory firm focused on fostering complex business opportunities throughout the Middle East. Before his tenure at Blue Laurel, Zafrir held the position of Director of Emerging Markets and Development Finance Department at Israel's Ministry of Economy and Industry.
Shalom. Shalom. Good morning. Boker Tov. Thank you, organizers, and Mr. Taib. Thank you very much for this day. It's actually quite amazing to hold such a day, such a conference at times of war, and you know, keeping in mind that our hostages are still in captive, but we are thinking of the future, and we're thinking of the reality that they will come out to, hopefully, inshallah, soon. Last Thursday, I attended a book launching. It's a book written by my dear friend, colleague, former kibbutznik, and an international development practitioner, Ariel Dlumi. It's a collection of short stories about Israeli manhood or masculinity. And while reading the stories, the short stories, one actually transitions from the very rough form of Israeli masculinity in the kibbutz, in the army. Ariel was a tank officer, to something that's softer, that's more sensitive, that's more open to the man, more open to his surroundings, to family and friends. And I share this story, first of all, so you know what I read, and that you also buy the book. I don't get commission. But also to tell you that it requires courage to rewrite a story. And what we are doing here today is starting to rewrite the story of Israel and Africa relations. And it's in our power, and it's in our hands to decide if this story will be a story of a gold mine or a story of a minefield. Over the past couple of months, my colleague Yuval Derry and I were tasked with the immense effort of telling the story, or telling the basic, the initial story that we want to rewrite about Israel and Africa economic, trade, investment, innovation, relations, a continuation of the study that Merav just presented. And I want to share with you some of the findings. This is the starting point of our new story. First of all, who can tell us what this number stands for? If Merav mentioned it actually, briefly. Percentage of? It is of exports to Africa. This is the percentage of Israeli exports to Africa. It hasn't changed for the past 20 years. And that's why it's very easy to put this number on a slide. And we need to acknowledge that fact, that the number hasn't changed. Now another number. Two numbers. What do these two numbers stand for?
Clearly an insufficiency of some sort, right? Clearly.
Shai knows me for many years. So this is the amount of euros invested in Africa, development finance invested in Africa. Zero is the Israeli figure. 3.8 billion euros is the European figure, 15 European DFIs. And one of the striking facts about Israel and Africa economic relations is that Israel doesn't have a development finance institutions, and I will touch upon that later. You already know that this is going to be one of our main recommendations. But this shows you the gap between how Israel is performing in the continent and how other countries and European development institutions are not necessarily huge entities. Some of them belong to countries that are smaller or at the same size of Israel. And how does that reflect, how do these figures reflect in one number? We came across this index developed by the Denver University. It's a formal bilateral influence capacity. And we looked at few countries to show you how Israel performs compared to some other countries. And you can do the same exercise with any other country that you want. You can see that the Israel line, the purple pink, is pretty stagnant from 2000. And this is maybe important to mention that we looked at Israeli-African relations from 2000 onwards because it is a moment of change. It's a moment of change for Israeli economy. It's when the Israeli service economy and mainly high-tech reached a significant level of maturity. And at the same time, we all know it was a moment, it's a time of change in Africa, and the African economies have grown. It's a period of relative stability in the continent, and we thought it would make sense to compare the last 25 years, whereas in contrast to going all the way back to the 60s and telling stories that are important and interesting, but not necessarily relevant to our days. In any case, as you can see, the Israeli line is very stagnant, the pink, whereas some of our friends or enemies like UAE and Turkey, you can see the very significant upward trend starting around 2005, which is very interesting when comparing with powers like Germany and the UK. We also included Iran. It hasn't changed much, mainly because Iran doesn't have any military relations formal military relations with African countries. They're not pushing that at all, and that affects the index. And Finland also is similar to Israel. However, when you look only at the economic influence index, which I don't have here, but you can read in the report that will be published soon, you will see how the Finns, a small nation, tech-based, innovation-oriented, how the Finns in the economic influence really jump much higher than Israel. So the fact that we failed over the past 25 years to increase our exports, to invest in Africa, to develop significant bilateral and multilateral and regional relations show in different indices, and this is just one of them. So what has been the impacts of the changes in both Israel and Africa over the past 25 years? How have we kind of responded to these changes that I mentioned really briefly, but I assume, or I think most of you know. So our findings, we show that on the diplomatic arena, and my colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will discuss that further. Israel currently has 11 embassies only 11 embassies in the continent. Just to remind you, 54 countries, if I'm not mistaken, 46 in sub-Saharan Africa. Right, Ron? I still remember the figures. We don't have any free trade deals with any African countries, with any African country as opposed to other continents. And over the past, a recent paper or article in The Economy shows Israel among the most ambitious countries in aiming for trade deals in the past 5 or 10 years. But we don't have any with Africa, even though we've signed deals with Asian countries, obviously Latin America, and renewed agreements with the US and others. Trade has been stagnant. We saw that. Minimal bilateral investment. The numbers Merav mentioned, they haven't changed much since 2020. And for various reasons, which you can read in the paper. I don't have time to get into all the reasons why there's so little investment. Tech cooperation, even though Israel is the startup nation and it's clearly one of the main strategic objectives of Israel to enhance the dissemination of tech innovation around the world, and in particular in developing countries. Tech cooperation between Israel and Africa is minimal. Currently, there are no official Israeli programs supporting the expansion of tech companies in the continent. Peers program is doing an amazing job, but it's not a government. And new spheres, which I'll mention in a minute, are rarely explored. We don't see any new announcements about new fields of cooperation, things that have not been discussed in the past. And we offer a few ideas for policymakers and for you, all of you, to consider. And all of that under the context of a relatively positive perception of Israel in the continent. So one would say that, you know, the world doesn't like us and everybody's against us. And it may be true to Europe, may be true to parts of North America, but it's not the case in Africa. So despite all the changes, despite all the transitions that both Israel and Africa have been through over the past 25 years, the sentiment towards Israel remains positive. So how do we leverage that? A few ideas to think of. First and foremost, and in my opinion, in the opinion of my colleague Yuval, the single most important policy measure that Israel needs to enact tomorrow, yesterday, is setting up a DFI, a development finance institution. This will be or could be a game changer in the way, in Israel's ability to interact with the continent. It will balance Israel's position vis-a-vis its competitors, both enemies and friends. And this is the way business is done in the world. Every single developed country has some kind of a DFI, different shapes and forms, that enhance investment, enhance bilateral cooperation, provides technical assistance, and obviously patient capital finance to projects in Africa and other developing countries, and towards achieving the sustainable development goals. And this is super important in order for us to rewrite the story of Israel and Africa. A side note to setting up a DFI is upgrading Ashra. It's an important government-owned company. Again, I won't go into all the details, but it should be more happy to take risk. It should be allowed to support projects that are done with private entities in the continent rather than just Ministry of Finance of African countries. On the trade side, correct me if I'm wrong, Shai, I think in 2019 or 2020, exports of services exceeded exports of goods for Israel. Now over 50% of our exports are in services. We saw that when we look at goods or total trade, it's been stagnant. In our opinion, it's time, forgive me for saying that, abandon goods, focus on trade. It is in line with the changes in the continent. It's in line with the emergence of digital economy in Africa and the provision of services remotely. Since Israel is a small country, resources are limited. If we need to choose, we need to choose services. And this is a policy decision that can trickle down to business. In terms of tech, so we looked at a few sectors. We analyzed the trends in the continent as well as trends here in Israel over the past 5 years or so. In our opinion, and I call upon you to argue this opinion and come up with new ideas. We should focus on fintech, agritech, and health tech. Again, as a small country, if I'm a decision maker, Today, I would focus on those three that pose the largest potential for returns for Israel and also benefits for our African counterparts. And looking at new fields of activity, fields of cooperation that could be explored. First of all, cooperation in labor. We unfortunately witnessed a shortage of workers here in Israel due to the October 7th attack. There is a growing interest among many African countries, and all the numbers indicate that African countries aim to increase the number of legal workers in other countries. It's a matter of planning it, designing it in the right way, ensuring that these workers can work legally and get all the benefits and they are not abused, but it's possible. And there have been few incidental examples of how that can work. And if Israel opens up to African laborers, again, legally and preventing any form of abuse, it could be a game changer for the relations. Tourism, again, another untapped market for both sides, Israeli tourists to Africa, African tourists to Israel, and pension funds. Because of the very young population in Africa and the changes in labor markets in Africa and the changes in public financing in Africa, pension funds are growing. If I remember correctly, they've grown, the assets under management for African pension funds have grown over 40% in the past 4 or 5 years. This is a tremendous amount of money. It's very little compared to European and US pension funds, but they withdraw their investment from Israel. So again, why not reach out to those pension funds, build the relationships? Yeah, they will not invest in 2025, but can they invest in 2035? Probably yes. It's just a matter of relationship building and rewriting this story, rewriting the story of Israel and Africa. And finally, policy recommendations. Needless to say, long-term thinking and relationship building. We need to find ways to cultivate cross-sector collaborations and efforts and break the silos between governments, private sector, and non-profit organizations. And last but not least important is we need to think, after we've planned and designed, we need to think how we measure our success so that we can change and improve and continue rewriting the story of Israel and Africa. Thank you very much.